that available today, right now, is the Asia Pacific Seoul region.
Nice to meet you and very much thank you.
획득이 되기도 합니다. AWS 사용기를
피크 타임에 대비해서
Fantastic AWS.
2018 AWS 실제로 방금
AWS는
Thank you, Doug, and welcome everybody. It is thrilling to be here with you. And thank you for taking your time to spend with us today to learn a little bit more about AWS and the cloud. I'll start by communicating what we've learned over the last 12 to 18 months, which is really that the cloud has become the new normal. And you see companies of all sizes deploying applications, new applications to the cloud by default, and companies trying to move as many of their existing applications as fast as possible to the cloud. And you can see this borne out in AWS's business results over the last several quarters. So I'll run through a few of these. We have over 1 million active customers. And the way to think of an active customer in AWS is it's a non-Amazon entity that's used our platform in the last 30 days. And then if you look at our compute service, EC2, you can see that year over year, if you compare the number of instances used, it's grown 88%. Our storage service, S3, if you look at the amount of data transferred in and out of the service, that's grown 102%. These are both on gigantic bases. And then if you look at our database business, which consists of our relational database service, our DynamoDB service, our caching service, and our data warehouse service, Redshift, you can see that that's also grown 113% year over year and is now well over $1 billion revenue run rate business. So a very large database business. And then these bars represent revenue run rate, not in successive years, but in successive quarters. And you can see the very fast rate of growth where in Q3, which are the last numbers we reported, AWS has an $8.4 billion revenue run rate growing at 78% year over year. So a very fast growing business. So why? Why are companies moving so fast to the cloud? And there are 6 reasons we typically hear from customers. The first is, if you don't have to lay out all that capital in advance for data centers and servers, and instead get to pay for it just as you consume it, that's very attractive. Most companies will trade capital expense for variable expense. And then second, that variable expense is much lower than what companies can do on their own, and that's because AWS is such large scale at this point that we pass on to you, our customers, in the form of lower prices. So you get to turn capital expense to a variable expense, a lower variable expense than you can do on your own, and then you don't have to guess any longer how much capacity you need. And this is a problem. If you've ever had to estimate how much infrastructure you need for an application, you either guess too low and don't have enough capacity to provide the right customer experience, or you guess too high and you sit on all that wasted capital when you don't sustain the peak. With the cloud, you don't have to guess anymore. You provision what you think you need. If it turns out to be more, you seamlessly scale up. And if it turns out to be less, then you give it back to us and you stop paying for the peak. And you can see we have relentlessly worked hard at taking cost out of our own cost structure and then pass those back to our customers in the form of lower prices. We've lowered our prices on 51 different occasions in the last 10 years, largely in the absence of any competitive pressure to do so. And we just had our latest price decrease yesterday, where we decreased the prices of our C4, M4, and R3 EC2 instances. So it tends to be that cost is the conversation starter and what gets people thinking about the cloud. But in most cases, the most compelling reason for why enterprises are moving to the cloud is agility. In the old world, if you needed a server to try an experiment or a new project, it would typically take you 12 to 18 weeks to get that server, which is maddening. And on top of it, you have to have your teams go build all the corresponding infrastructure services to support that application. In the cloud, you can spin up thousands of servers in minutes, and then you have this very large number of infrastructure services that AWS provides at your fingertips, so you can get from idea to implementation faster than ever. The fifth reason is that if you can take your scarce resource, which are usually software development engineers, and instead of having them focus on the undifferentiated heavy lifting of infrastructure, which matters but hardly ever differentiates your business, and instead focus those resources on what really differentiates your mission, that's a huge advantage. And then sixth, most companies today, even startups, have global end users. And in the old days, if you wanted to serve your global end users in different parts of the world, to try to find a data center close to those customers that is reliable and cost effective and that you could trust was pretty hard. So most didn't do it. Most would serve all of their global customers from one or two infrastructure locations. Well, with the cloud and with AWS's very broad global footprint, it means that you can deploy your applications in our infrastructure all over the world in minutes and be a global company instantly and provide a better customer experience with lower latency to your customers with the data sovereignty, storing your data locally wherever you need to do. So those are a very compelling set of benefits and why companies are moving as fast as they are to the cloud. So the cloud is very compelling. Why are companies predominantly choosing AWS? And I think there are a few reasons that I'll share. The first is AWS has a lot more functionality than any other technology infrastructure provider by a lot. And this, I won't go through all of the items in this slide, but you can see that we've built a very robust and fully featured technology infrastructure platform with over 50 services. And I'll just hit the high points here. You can see at the very bottom layer of our infrastructure, we have regions all over the world where we have multiple data centers or availability zones. We have 53 points of presence for our content distribution network. Then we have a series of building block services. We have a very large compute service. We have multiple storage services, object storage and block storage, and backup and archival storage. We have multiple flavors of relational database services. We have a NoSQL database service and a caching service. We have a content distribution network called CloudFront, and then we have a networking layer that you can layer on top of all these infrastructure building blocks. Then we have a number of security and compliance capabilities. We have very fine-grained identity and access management and access control and monitoring. And then a number of app services, things like queuing and notifications and search and email. And then a number of analytics services, and people are doing incredible amounts of big data analytics on top of the AWS platform. And so we have batch analytics services, streaming analytics services, machine learning services, a data warehouse. We have a number of mobile services, so identity and sync and A/B testing and analytics and SMS push and API gateway. We have a number of IoT capabilities. We just launched AWS IoT, which is our IoT platform, at our annual event this past October. And then a number of enterprise solutions that we've built that allow customers to have a higher abstraction on top of our platform. These are things like virtual desktops in the cloud and workspaces, or enterprise storage and collaboration with WorkDocs, or hosted and secure email with Work Email. And then we have a marketplace that we launched a few years ago that has over 35 categories of products from over 800 ISVs, where it's effectively one-click deployment on top of EC2. This is a marketplace that now has 2,500 products. And just to give you an idea of how broadly used it is right now, just in the last month, customers ran 143 million hours of EC2 instances with this software on top of it. So a very fast-growing marketplace. A number of hybrid services for our customers that want to be able to run their on-premise data centers alongside AWS. And then a number of people services, the things like not just salespeople and account management, but technical support so that you can have a one-on-one account manager who knows your setup on AWS. We have professional services and solutions architects. And then we've got all kinds of training and certification for you. This is a very broad, very fully featured technology infrastructure platform that has a lot more services than you can find elsewhere. But it's not just the number of services at your disposal in AWS, but it's also the number of features within those services. And let me give you a few examples. In our compute service, EC2, we don't just have a standard compute family that has a commensurate amount of memory and CPU. All of your workloads are different and have different constraints. So as a result, we have instance families that are compute optimized, memory optimized, storage optimized, GPU optimized. We have an extra high memory family we just launched called X1. We have an I/O optimized family. We have a burstable, low-cost family that we call T2. And then you can run in a dedicated fashion if you decide you want to be the only company on a particular server that you can run across these instance families. No other provider has even half of these. Or look at our database capability. In our relational database service, we have 6 flavors of relational database options. We have MySQL, Postgres, MariaDB, Oracle, SQL Server, and our own database engine that's fully MySQL compatible called Aurora. And then you can run your database across multiple data centers or availability zones, or with read replicas to handle some of your high scale. No other provider has more than one of these. Or look at encryption, which matters quite obviously to enterprises. You have lots of encryption options in AWS. You can either do server-side encryption with services like S3, or you can bring your own keys to work with that. Or if you want to store your keys in hardware security modules, we have a dedicated cloud HSM service for you that you can run in all of our regions. And if you want to use our key management service, which allows you to do one-click encryption and an easy way to rotate your keys and integrates all of AWS services, you can use our key management service. And then we have a way for you to audit any change in your keys. Anybody who's tried to add keys or change keys or remove keys through our CloudTrail service. Again, no other provider has more than one of these. Or look at access control, which obviously is very important in how you protect the people who are going to use the resources inside your company. And you have the ability with AWS's access control where you can limit access by the identity of a person, not just the role, by their location, by time-based policies, by the individual API calls that you want them to be able to use or not. And so what that means is in AWS, you can set something up where you can say, Steve can only launch RDS instances from Seattle headquarters during business hours. In contrast, all any other provider in this space can do is say, any DBA can do anything to RDS from any place at any time. That's a huge difference when you're thinking about trying to make sure that you're secure and you're protecting the privacy of your data and your various services. You also have the ability to easily rotate keys, to have short-lived credentials, and to check out and test the policies you're putting in place before you put them into action. Again, no other provider has even half of these. So it's not just the number of services you find in AWS, but it's also the number of features within those services that differentiates the platform. And on top of that huge advantage in functionality, you'll also find that AWS is iterating and delivering at a faster rate than anybody else. So just for perspective, you can see in 2013 that we launched what we consider 289 significant services and features. In 2014, that number was 516. Last year, that number was 722. So we are iterating at a very fast rate, and the pace of innovation in AWS is accelerating. So the first thing is that we have a lot more functionality than any other provider. we are iterating at a faster clip. The third thing is that we have a much broader ecosystem that's being built around the AWS platform. And when you're going through a technology shift, and I would argue that the cloud is the largest technology shift of our era, it is incredibly helpful to have a partner and customer ecosystem that's going there with you. And you can see that across the various segments. So in systems integrators, we have thousands of systems integrators who have built practices to help our customers think about how to move to AWS and do so safely. And they range from some of the largest global systems integrators like Accenture or Cognizant or Booz Allen or Infosys or Wipro, to some of the SIs that were really born or reborn in the cloud. And these are folks like Second Watch and Dataluz and CloudReach and Slalom and InfoReliance and Smartronix. And you see the same thing in the independent software vendor community or the ISV community, where there are thousands of ISVs that have either built their application from the start on top of AWS, like Acquia, or who have adjusted their ISV applications so that it will run on top of AWS's technology infrastructure platform. And those are companies like Adobe and Atlassian and Esri and Infor and Informatica and Oracle and Pega and SAP and Splunk. Very broad group of ISVs that have made their software available on top of AWS. But it's also the number of customers that are running on top of the AWS platform. When you're making a shift, it's very helpful to have other companies who have a similar profile, either in the industry or in terms of security and compliance to what you're doing, who are going there too, both to share best learnings and to give you a little bit of air cover as you propose it to your company. And you see that AWS has over 1 million active customers, and it's a very diverse customer base. And it ranges from some of the largest startups around. These are companies like Pinterest and Airbnb and Stripe and Domo and Slack and Palantir. Lots of Korean startups too, companies like Zigbang and PickyCast and Yogio, to enterprises in every imaginable vertical business segment. So in oil and gas, you see Shell and Hess and BP using AWS. In financial services, Capital One and Intuit and FINRA and the Commonwealth Bank of Australia. In healthcare, Pfizer and Merck and Johnson & Johnson and Bristol Myers Squibb. In technology, Netflix and Samsung and Adobe. In gaming, you see EA and Supercell and Nexon. In media, you see News Corp and the Financial Times and Condé Nast. Every imaginable vertical business segment is using AWS in a meaningful way. And you see it again here in Korea as well, with companies, as I mentioned, like Samsung or LG or KBS or EasterJet, just a very broad group of enterprises. So a lot more functionality than you'll find elsewhere, with innovation happening quicker, a larger ecosystem than you'll find anywhere else. And then the fourth reason is that AWS has the most mature experience platform. And we have an expression inside of AWS. We've been doing this business, Val, for 10 years, and the business has obviously grown very quickly. And the expression we use internally is that there's no compression algorithm for experience. And it's really true. We've learned this over the years, that you just can't learn certain lessons until you get to different elbows of the curve. And what you find is that the other providers just don't have enough scale yet to have learned some of those lessons. And you see it in a bunch of places. You see it in the variability of the network. You see it in being able to isolate regions so that if there's a problem in one region, you don't find problems in all over the world. They're just different platforms at different levels of maturity. And it's why you see analyst assessments like this. This is the most recent Magic Quadrant from Gartner for infrastructure as a service. And you can see AWS as the leader in the top right. And if you're going to make an investment in a technology infrastructure platform, which is what you're going to do when you decide to move to the cloud, you want to make sure that you can not only move the new applications that you want to build and build those on top of that platform, but you want to be able to move all of your existing applications to that platform as well, so you don't have to manage a patchwork of different infrastructure platforms. It turns out when you talk to customers that they don't want a fraction of the functionality of the leading cloud provider. And they don't want a circa 2011 infrastructure platform. They want all of the functionality of the leader. That's what allows them to build in an unfettered way, and it's typically how they make their decision about which technology infrastructure platform they're going to use, and hence why people are predominantly choosing AWS. Now, a very well-known company that is making great strides on top of the AWS platform is Samsung, who is doing all kinds of work in their printing division and their electronics division and their smart hub applications that they've built. And to hear more about their use of AWS, it's my pleasure to introduce the Vice President of Samsung Electronics, the Head of Big Data Group of Information Technology and Mobile Communications Division, Yoonjin Soo.
여러분 반갑습니다. 저는 지금 방금 소개받은 삼성전자에서 빅데이터 그룹을 맡고 있는 윤진수입니다. 우선 오늘 이렇게 뜻깊은 그 AWS 클라우드 서울 2010년 행사에 저를 그 키노트 스피치에 초대해 주셔서 감사합니다. 저희 회사는 2011년에 아마존 웹서비스 한국 지사가 설립되었던 시점부터 지금까지 저희 회사의 다양한 서비스들을 제공하기 위해서 AWS를 사용해 왔습니다. 네, 그 중에서 오늘은 저희가 그 AWS를 이용한 빅데이터 분석 환경 구축에 대해서 여러분과 잠시 얘기를 나누고자 합니다. 잘 아시다시피 저희 회사에서는 휴대폰, 웨어러블, TV, 가전과 같은 스마트 기기들을 매년 수억 대씩 판매하고 있습니다. 최근에는 스마트띵스와 같은 회사를 인수하거나 관련되는 업체들하고 협력을 통해서 이 제품군을 IoT 분야로 점차 확대해 나가고 있습니다. 또한 이런 제품들, 단순한 제품뿐만 아니라 제품에 올라가는 서비스들을 통해서 다양한 서비스들도 마찬가지로 제공하고 있습니다. 특히 정확하게 1년 전인 요 CES 기조연설을 통해서 저희 회사의 윤부구 대표이사께서 2020년까지 저희 회사의 모든 제품들이 IoT로 연결될 수 있도록 하겠다는 선언을 하셨습니다. 이 의미는 이를 통해서 소비자는 연결된 제품과 그 위에 올라가는 서비스를 통해서 커넥티드 익스피리언스를 제공받게 될 텐데 그거의 다른 한편을 본다라면 그렇게 연결되어 있는 디바이스들을 통해서 이전과는 다른 규모의 데이터들이 나올 것이라고 저희가 예상하고 있습니다. 저희가 2013년에 빅데이터 분석 시스템을 구축했던 시점부터 지금까지도 계속적으로 고민하고 있는 챌린지들이 있습니다. 첫 번째는 저희 제품과 서비스에서 나온 데이터들이 굉장히 다양한 형태의 규모의 사이즈를 갖고 있고요. 또 하나는 그 데이터의 양이 저희가 제품을 출시하면서 서비스를 출시하면서 지속적으로 증가하게 되고 있다는 것입니다. 그래서 이런 데이터들을 처리하기 위해서는 그 데이터를 분석하는 시스템이 스케일러빌리티가 굉장히 중요하게 될 거고요. 두 번째로는 구축하고자 하는 빅데이터 분석 환경에서 처리하는 데이터들이 굉장히 기하급수적으로 이미 증가하고 있기 때문에 저희 시스템을 운영하는 입장에서 그 시스템 운영의 비용이 굉장히 효율적이어야 합니다. 셋째로는 저희가 현재 이미 제공하고 있거나 앞으로 제공하려는 서비스들이 활용하는 인프라들이 있는데요. 이 인프라에서 나오는 데이터들이 자연스럽게 그리고 저희 분석하려고 하는 환경 쪽으로 넘어갈 수 있는 이런 좀 쉬운 데이터 매니지먼트가 또 굉장히 중요하게 됩니다. 마지막으로는 이러한 시스템에 대한 구축이나 변경이 굉장히 손쉽고 신속하게 일어나야 된다는 것이고요. 또 하나는 저희가 어떤 특정 지역이 아닌 글로벌 스케일의 커버리지가 굉장히 중요하게 된다는 것입니다. 그래서 저희가 이런 주요한 고민들을 심도 있게 비교 분석, 검토한 결과 자연스럽게 AWS를 선택하게 되었습니다. 여기서는 AWS를 이용한 빅데이터 분석의 간단한 플로우의 스냅샷을 좀 보고 계신데요. 디바이스나 서비스에서 나오는 데이터들이 아마존에서 제공하고 있는 S3 스토리지, 그 다음에 아마존 EMR, 일렉트릭 맵 리듀서와 같은 처리 솔루션, 그 다음에 EC2, RDS와 레드시프트와 같은 데이터베이스 같은 솔루션들을 이용해서 수집, 저장되고 처리되는 과정을 거치게 되고요. 그 다이렉트 커넥트를 통해서 저희 회사에 있는 내부 시스템과의 연동이 이루어지게 됩니다. 그걸 통해서 데이터가 수집되면서부터 분석되는 데 이르는 일련의 과정들이 완성되는 형태로 저희가 현재 이런 빅데이터 분석 시스템을 구축해 놓고 있습니다. 이렇게 AWS를 활용한 빅데이터 분석 환경을 통해서 사실은 저희 회사 내부에 있는 시스템은 아무래도 한정되어 있는 리소스 인프라스트럭처인데 반해서 AWS가 언리미티드 형태의 인프라스트럭처를 제공하고 있기 때문에 저희 내부 인프라에 대한 강력한 보안 역할을 사실은 제공하고 있고요. 이런 시스템들을 통해서 저희가 분석한 내용들은 저희 제품이나 서비스의 경쟁력을 강화하거나 또한 내부의 인터널 프로세스를 혁신함으로써 새로운 서비스나 제품들을 저희가 만들어낼 수 있는 기대들도 하고 있고요. 또한 저희가 예를 들어서 타겟 마케팅 같은 것을 통한 새로운 비즈니스 그러니까 레비뉴 창출에 대한 기회도 기대를 하고 있습니다. 오늘 말씀드린 그 빅데이터 분석 시스템은 사실 2013년부터 쭉 시작이 되어 왔고요. 저희가 일련의 과정을 통해서 빅데이터 플랫폼을 구축을 하고 그 인프라스트럭처에 대한 옵티마이제이션 작업들을 지금 진행해 왔으며 2014년부터는 본격적으로 저희 데이터 분석을 통한 서비스들을 자체에 제공하고 있습니다. 또 한 가지는 아마존에서 AWS의 한국 내에 리전을 설립한다는 소식을 듣게 되었는데요. 이런 한국 내에 리전이 설립된다라면은 저희 입장에서는 이 빅데이터 분석 환경의 그 운영의 효율성들을 조금 더 극대화할 수 있는 기회가 될 수 있을 거라고 판단해서 이 아마존 국내 리전의 설립에 대한 기대가 굉장히 크고요. 이런 과정을 통해서 아마존과 협업을 통해서 이런 좋은 마이그레이션 플랜들을 지금 계획하고 있습니다. 오늘 짧게나마 제가 소개를 드렸는데요. 아무튼 이런 뜻깊은 자리에 초대해서 감사드리고요. 아무튼 여기서 오늘 제가 발표해야 될 것들을 마치도록 하겠습니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you very much. It is inspiring and an honor to partner with Samsung, and we learn all the time from customers like you. So thank you for your partnership, and thanks for the presentation. So one of the questions we get asked a lot from people is, they say something like the following. They say, I get the cloud has a lot of benefits. I'm excited about the cloud, but how should I think about moving? What are other companies doing? Can you share some best practices? And of course, each company pursues their own journey to the cloud, and each are a little bit different. But if I can generalize, I would summarize it in the following way in terms of how people tend to sequence their movement to the cloud. So the first phase of what people tend to move workload-wise to the cloud usually has two components. The first is dev and test, which makes sense. Almost every big shift in technology, dev and test are the first workloads to go. And you see that here too. You can see the Tokyo Stock Exchange is running all their Oracle applications in dev and test on AWS, or Lionsgate, which is the very large entertainment company, is running their SAP applications on the way to production in dev and test today in AWS. But the second one that you see in this first phase of migration is altogether new applications, which makes sense because you don't have to worry about any of the legacy or any of the dependencies that existing applications have. New applications get to take advantage of all the benefits of the cloud that I was talking about earlier right from the start. And you see, again, lots of companies that are building all kinds of innovative new customer experiences for their customers on top of AWS. So some examples. If you look at Siemens Healthcare Diagnostics, they're basically trying to deliver lower cost patient care that's higher quality than it's ever been built before. And so they've built a very large analytics platform on top of AWS to help caretakers personalize patient treatment through companion diagnostics testing. Very interesting, very different. Or look at what Qantas Airlines did. They, obviously have a very successful airlines business, but they wanted to build a subsidiary business that sold hotel rooms. So they built a brand new business and application called Huru.com on top of AWS, and they built it in a much shorter time than it would have taken them to do it on premises at a much lower cost. Or look at the Singapore Post, which is the largest postal carrier here in Asia Pacific, and it's been around for a very long time. They built a brand new e-commerce business and platform on top of AWS. It now represents roughly a third of their revenue. Think about how long that entity has been around. And they were able to do it all in 3 months at 50% less than it would have cost them to do it on premises. So in this first phase, you tend to see dev and test and altogether new applications move to the cloud. The second phase is characterized by 3 different workloads we tend to see move. The first are websites, or what people are calling digital transformations, and these are relatively easy applications to move to the cloud, and there are lots of examples of this as well. Unilever, the global company, has roughly 2,000 applications now in AWS. Over half of them have been migrated, and they built a platform to make it much simpler to migrate websites to AWS, and they find they can launch websites 75% faster in AWS than when they were trying to do it on premises. Or you can look at McCormick, which is a global leader in the flavor industry. It's $4 billion in sales as a company. And they have scaled up their websites on top of AWS. They've doubled their capacity on top of AWS, but saved 50% relative to what they were doing on premise. So in that second phase, you tend to see these websites and digital transformations happening first, closely followed by analytics. It has never been easier and less expensive to collect, store, analyze, and share data than it is today in the cloud. And a lot of that has to do with the economics of the cloud, but also a lot of it has to do with the services that AWS has provided customers. And so we give our customers a very large object storage service in S3. You have the ability to run Hadoop or Spark in our Elastic MapReduce service. If you don't want to wait for batch analytics and you want the data to come in real time and process that data, that streaming data, you can use Kinesis, which is our platform for processing of real-time streaming data. We have an Elasticsearch service we launched a few months ago that's off to a roaring start. We have a machine learning service. We have a data warehouse service called Redshift, which is one of the fastest growing services in the history of AWS. And then we just launched a business intelligence service called QuickSight. So you have a very broad array of tools to actually do this big data analytics fast and inexpensively. And you're seeing lots of companies do it. For instance, NTT Docomo is running their 4 petabyte data warehouse on top of Redshift. Or you can look at TradeWorks, which is an ISV that built an application for the Securities Exchange Commission in the US, and they built something that allows them to reconstruct billions of data over years, breaking down any market event to an individual event, a record. And it gives them the ability to analyze 3 billion data points in 2.8 seconds. And they can do all of that for 10% of the cost of what they were doing when the SEC was running that on premises. Or you can look at Viviki, which is the French global media provider, and they run all kinds of marketing campaigns all the time. And they use AWS to assess the ROI of those campaigns in real time so they can make adjustments. And if they compare what they're doing on AWS to what they were doing on premises, they're running more analyses than they were before. They're saving 75% in operating costs. And the same analyses that took them 20 days to do before, they're getting done in 6 hours on AWS. Just very different capabilities. So digital transformations, analytics, and then mobile and IoT applications round out that second phase of migrations. And if you think about it, a lot of these mobile and IoT applications are somewhat similar to the altogether new applications. Most companies have employees and customers that use 3 devices. They have a phone, a tablet, and a laptop or a desktop. And they want their experience to be consumable by all of those devices. And so you see them rebuilding all their applications to be able to use in a mobile fashion. And you see lots of examples of that. Again, if you look at Vodafone in Australia, for instance, all of their streaming services are running on top of AWS. Or if you look at Xiaomi, the large phone provider out of China, they're running their app store on top of AWS. But what you also find is more and more companies, and you heard it in the last presentation too, more and more companies want to be running IoT services. And the way to think of IoT or Internet of Things is that there are millions of sensors that are going to be in people's homes, in people's workplaces, in oil fields, everywhere. And those sensors are capturing an enormous amount of data. Now, of course, those sensors are small. And the smaller the device, the less CPU and the less disk they have, and the more important the cloud becomes. And so what you find is most of the IoT applications that exist today are being built on top of AWS. And you can see a few examples of this up on the slide. Illumina, which is the leading genome sequencing company, they take all that analysis that they get in the hardware and they send it up to AWS, and then they do really detailed and sophisticated analysis that they can use back in diagnoses and treatments. Or you can look at Tata Motors. They use AWS to stream all the GPS coordinates of their trucking fleet so they can be more efficient in their routes, and they can know ahead of time if they have to make repairs to different trucks in the fleet. So, second phase consists of digital transformation, analytics, and IoT and mobile apps. The third and fourth phases are often interchangeable. Some companies do one first, some do the other first. Business critical or mission critical apps is what I'll call this third phase. And these are the apps that you have to be slower and more careful and more thoughtful about because they have dependencies inside the company. And if they go down because you get the migration wrong, it can really impact the company's day-to-day operations. And yet, you're seeing a vast number of enterprises now that are moving their mission-critical applications to AWS. You can look at Kellogg's is running SAP HANA on AWS, or the Dutch bank Robeco has moved their entire retail banking platform to AWS. Or you can look at the German insurance company Talinx. They run their Solvency II calculations, which is really an assessment of what would happen if all your debts were called at one time. And if they compare running these on AWS to when they were running on premises, they're saving 75% in the calculation time, and also they're saving 8 million euros a year in cost versus doing it on premise. So some companies choose to move their business critical applications first. Others choose to migrate entire data centers. And what they typically do is they know they have a data center that's coming up for renewal and lease, or that they're going to have to do a big technology refresh. And they say, do I really want to do this? Or do I want to use this event as an occasion to move all of these applications to AWS? And we've had a number of companies now that are moving a significant number of data centers to AWS under this plan. Some examples are Condé Nast. They've moved 6 data centers to AWS. They moved 500 servers, 100 database servers, a petabyte of storage, all their mission-critical applications in those data centers, HR and legal and finance. And they did it all in 3 months, saving 40% versus what they were doing before when they were running their own data centers. Or you can look at News Corp, the very large global media company. They're in the process of moving from 45 data centers to 6, and the vast majority of that they're moving to AWS. So you see, in this fourth stage, companies moving entire data centers to AWS. The fifth stage, which is the most advanced stage, are companies deciding to go all in on the cloud in AWS. About a half dozen years ago, when the CEO of Netflix, Reed Hastings, decided that he was going to move everything to AWS, that was a very courageous decision. But today, it isn't so courageous and so unusual anymore. You see every month more and more companies deciding that they're going to get all of the benefits of the cloud as fast as possible and moving all into AWS. So it's not just Netflix. You can look at companies like Suncorp, which is the large financial insurance company in Australia, or you can look at Intuit, or you can look at Nippon Express, or you can look at FINRA, or you can look at Time, or you can look at AOL. It's just a very broad group of enterprises. And you also see the same thing with ISVs that are moving all into AWS as their cloud option. And you see that with companies like Infor and Informatica and IMS Health and Pega and TIPCO and Splunk. Very broad group that are increasing every month that are deciding they want all of the advantages they can get as fast as possible from the cloud. So what are some other questions that we get asked besides what are the patterns and how people migrate to AWS? There are a lot that we get asked, but I thought I would share with you 4 others that I think are useful and relevant. The first question that I'll talk about here is, people often say, well, if I move to AWS in the cloud, does it mean I'm going to lose control of my data? And does it mean that it's going to be secure? And this is a very understandable concern. Any company that's got data that matters, security should be your #1 priority. And what we tell customers is that they get to choose where that data is stored. They pick which region around the world that data is stored. It does not move unless they choose to move it. And to us, it just looks like a blob, but if you're concerned, extra concerned about privacy, you have the ability, as we talked about earlier, to encrypt that data in motion or at rest. So you have complete control of your data. And then customers say to us, well, okay, I understand that, but can I have the same security and compliance certifications that I'm used to having so it's easy to convince my organization to move to the cloud? And so over the last 10 years, we've gone out and gotten all the certifications that you guys have told us matters to you. And they range from SOC 1 and SOC 2 and SOC 3 to ISO 27001. You can be PCI compliant on top of AWS. You can be HIPAA compliant on top of AWS. We have all kinds of government certifications in multiple countries. And then, even our media customers said, we want you to get the highest security accreditation of the Motion Picture Association of America. So we went out and got that too. We will continue to go out and get the certifications that you tell us is important to you to be able to move your workloads to the cloud. But at the end of the day, on top of being able to control your data and having the right certifications at your disposal, it's the services and the capabilities we give you to provide whatever level of access control or security that you desire for your workloads. And so if you look at the networking side, we have a service called Virtual Private Cloud, or VPC, which effectively allows you to cordon off a portion of our network and deploy resources into it. You can break those into subnets that are either only addressable through IP addresses that you bring, or you can make those subnets addressable via the internet. And then it connects via VPN to your data center. So it's really like an extension to your data center footprint. We also launched a few months ago a web application firewall, or we call WAF, which helps you protect your web applications from any kind of attack by blocking web exploits like SQL injection or cross-site scripting, and you can use your own custom filters or the filters that we provide. So those are some networking capabilities. We also have a very broad array of encryption options for you, as I mentioned earlier. We have very fine-grained identity access management, so you can protect based on all the different policies we were talking about earlier, how you want your employees to be using the services that they're using. And then we have identity federation so that you can use the identities that you've built over time in your enterprise on AWS. And you can either use Active Directory or you can use SAML. And then a number of compliance capabilities that allow you to make sure that however your employees are using AWS, it's in a way that's consistent with the compliance regime that you want to carry out. So we have something called the Service Catalog, which allows systems administrators to be able to pick patterns that they'll allow various different employee groups to use on top of AWS. We have something called CloudTrail, which is really an API log where you can tell who made every API call, where that API call was made from, what resources they tried to impact, and what resources did they successfully impact. We have a service called Config, which allows you to see all of your AWS resources, know where all the dependencies are, and then if any of those configurations change, you can be notified to know about that, which is very important both for security and availability events. And then we have a service we launched a few months ago called Inspector, which allows you to send us your application, and we will take all of our expertise and best practices that we've learned over the years in protecting our platform, and we'll do a security assessment for you, and we'll send you a report that shows you any potential vulnerabilities you have or exposures that you have. And then we'll track what those are in CloudTrail so you can keep track of them, and then what steps you took to remediate them so that, again, your auditors are able to see what was found and what you did to address those. It's not just the ability to control your own data and own that control, which you have in AWS. It's also the security and compliance capabilities we give you to allow you to run in the way that you want to run. Now, anybody in the financial services space knows that security and compliance are unbelievably important. And one of the leader here in Korea in financial services has really been Mirai Asset. They are the first to move websites and applications in the financial services space to AWS. And of course, Mirai Asset Global Investments is the asset management arm of Mirai Asset Financial Group. It's one of the world's largest investors in emerging market equities. And to tell you how they're using the AWS platform, it's my pleasure to introduce the CIO of Mirai Asset Global Investments, Kim Won-gyu.
네, 안녕하십니까. 좀 미래에셋 자산운용 CIO 김완규 상무입니다. 만나서 반갑습니다. 이렇게 추운 날씨에도 이렇게 여러분께서 많이 오신 걸 보면 우리나라에서 클라우드에 대한 관심이 대단히 많은 거 봅니다. 이 대단히 이렇게 많은 관심 속에 제가 클라우드에 대한 경험을 여러분과 같이 공유할 수 있게 돼서 정말 영광스럽게 생각하고요. 먼저 시작하기 전에 그 미래에셋 자산운용의 비즈니스 모델과 그리고 회사 소개를 간략하게 하겠습니다. 자, 미래에셋 그 자산운용은 미래에셋 여러분이 잘 알고 계시는 미래에셋 금융그룹의 한 계열사로서 그 펀드 상품을 만들고 그리고 펀드를 운영하고 그 펀드 정보를 운영 정보를 투자자에게 전달하는 그런 투자 운용사입니다. 총 전체 자산이 한 85조 정도 펀드를 운영하고 있고 그 중에 한 40%, 30조 정도가 해외 자산에 투자하고 있습니다. 어떤 뭐 대만, 홍콩, 중국, 인디아 이런 아시아 국가를 시작해서 멀리 저 UK, 미국, 캐나다, 뭐 오스트레일리아 이런 선진 자본시장까지 이게 글로벌 네트워크를 가지고 있는데요. 총 11개 국가 그리고 19개 그 지점이 거기 진출해 있습니다. 이런 글로벌 네트워크를 바탕으로 해서 우리가 우리 국내 자산을 국내 자본으로 해외 자산을 투자하고 또 해외 고객한테 우리 국내에서 금융 상품을 이렇게 파는 그런 세일즈 역할을 좀 하고 있고요. 계속 글로벌로 확장을 하고 있습니다. 향후에는 정말 금융권에 앞서서 좀 발표했지만 금융권의 삼성전자 같은 회사가 만들려고 지금 많이 도전을 하고 있습니다. 요약하자면 미래에셋 자산운용은 글로벌 비즈니스에 초점을 맞추고 있다는 겁니다. 자, 지금 그 본론으로 들어가서 많은 분들께서 그 보수적인 우리 금융권에서 클라우드 도입하는데 어려움이 없었을까 하는 생각을 하고 계실 겁니다. 네, 맞습니다. 그러나 현재 그 모든 금융거래나 이런 금융거래 온라인으로 이루어지고 또 모바일로 좀 가고 있습니다. 그 미래에셋 또 이런 트렌드에 맞추기 위해서 뭐 모바일이나 클라우드, 빅데이터 같은 이런 것들을 축으로 해서 글로벌 확장을 계획하고 있고 또 혁신이라는 키워드를 가지고 작년에 우리 모든 국내 해외 모든 웹사이트 15개의 웹사이트를 자체적으로 관리하던 그 아이디 센터에서 그 아마존 클라우드 서비스로 다 이관을 하게 되었습니다. 결과적으로 물론 성능 개선, 뭐 비용 효율 이런 등 IT 혁신을 가져왔다고 생각합니다. 자, 그리고 그 많은 분들께서 뭐 클라우드 도입할 때 가장 우려스러워하시는 부분이 뭐 보안 그리고 규제 뭐 그런 게 아닐까 생각되는데요. 특히 금융권에서는 더욱이 보안이 상당히 중요한 이슈일 것입니다. 그러나 저의 경우에는 오히려 자체적으로 보안을 관리했을 때보다 오히려 더 좀 탄탄하고 안정감을 좀 받았는데요. 특히 그 미래에셋은 이전에도 외부 디도스로부터 많이 좀 위협을 많이 받고 있었고 실제로 뭐 해커들한테도 이렇게 연락도 받고 위협도 받고 했는데 그때마다 번번이 대응에 좀 어려움이 있었습니다. 근데 디도스 같은 거 보면 상당히 지금 클라우드 서비스로 이전한 이후에 상당히 강한 대응력을 가지고 있다고 생각이 되는데요. 우리 웹사이트는 그 아마존 클라우드 프론트라는 그런 장비 뒤쪽에 있고 외부에 노출이 되지 않음으로 해서 아마 도스 공격을 다 받아줄 수 있을 거라는 그런 생각을 듭니다. 그래서 상당히 이전보다는 리스크가 많이 줄어들었다는 생각을 합니다. 그리고 그 1단계로 먼저 우리가 클라우드를 가장 도입했던 부분이 해외 웹사이트를 도입했습니다. 뭐 각각 아까 말씀드렸듯이 해외 법인의 웹사이트들이 많은데 그 여러 개의 웹사이트를 다 통합해서 클라우드를 넘겼는데 이전에는 인도 IDC 그리고 서울 IDC 이렇게 두 개의 IDC를 운영했었는데 그러다 보니 저기 미국이나 뭐 브라질 그런 곳에서는 접속에 상당히 좀 어려움이 있었습니다. 근데 클라우드로 옮기고 나서 상당히 접속하는데 그 성능이 개선이 됐고 자체적으로 시뮬레이션을 해보니까 한 3배 정도 이 정도 성능 개선이 있는 걸로 나타났습니다. 그리고 그 국내 문제인데요. 해외 부분은 상당히 어려움이 없었습니다. 근데 국내 부분은 상당히 좀 어려움이 있었는데 좀 상황이 달랐습니다. 그 규정에 해외 IDC 그 금융권, 금융전사는 해외 위탁 금지라는 규정이 있었고요. 그래서 좀 어려움이 있었는데 이 시점에서 정부의 금융개혁 의지가 또 있었고 작년에 그러면서 금융위에서 그 현장 점검반을 구성해서 각 그 금융업계의 그 어려움이나 뭐 애로사항 그런 걸 청취하는 그런 자리에 간담회에서 제가 참석해서 강하게 이런 규제 완화를 좀 건의를 했었고 그래서 결국은 이제 받아들여져서 나머지 국내도 다 성공적으로 마무리할 수 있게 됐는데요. 아마 이런 규제 완화 부분이 뭐 아마존 그 AWS 코리아나 또 다른 금융권에 계신 분한테도 상당히 좋은 소식이 아니었나 싶습니다. 그리고 이제 그 다음에 국내 아까 말씀드렸듯이 2단계 웹사이트도 다 성공적으로 이전을 하고 뭐 한국에서도 뭐 해외만큼은 아니지만 그래도 한 50% 성능이나 속도 개선이 있었고 뭐 기업에 계신 분들께서 뭐 클라우드를 처음에 도입을 할 때 제일 먼저 그 고려할 수 있는 부분이 웹사이트인데요. 미래에서도 웹사이트를 이미 이제 끝냈고 그 다음으로 마이크로소프트 쉐어포인트 기반의 그런 포탈 인트라넷도 이전을 해서 성공적으로 그 프로젝트를 마무리했습니다. 이후에 앞으로도 계속 이런 업무 범위를 넓혀 나갈 예정이고요. 또 올해는 또 계속해서 그 단계가 보이는데 2014년, 15년, 16년도에는 아주 미션 크리티컬 업무, 뭐 우리 내부의 핵심 업무인 뭐 리스크 매니지먼트나 리서치 그리고 뭐 증권 분석 시스템 이런 우리가 가장 중요한 업무들에 대해서도 AWS 클라우드를 옮기려고 계획을 하고 있습니다. 그 앞으로도 우리는 그 클라우드 퍼스트 그 모델을 지향으로 해서 인프라, 뭐 보안 이런 IT 관련 하드웨어 관련들은 다 AWS에 맡기고 우리는 그 우리 본연의 업무, 그 고객의 성공적 자산 운영을 위한 그래서 그 투자 전문가로서의 역할을 충실히 할 수 있고 또 IT 부분에서는 뭐 운용 소프트웨어 개발을 위해서 모든 IT 자원을 그런 개발에 집중할 수 있을 것이라고 생각을 합니다. 뭐 시간이 짧아서 여기까지 제가 뭐 더 전달해주지 못한 것은 아쉬운데요. 이것으로 저희 발표를 마치겠습니다. 감사합니다.
thank you. Very inspiring, again, and appreciate your collaboration, your leadership. I think a lot of other financial services companies are going to be following your lead. So the second question that I'll talk about that we get asked a lot is companies who say, what role does hybrid play with the cloud? And there are a lot of companies who have data centers on-premise that they're not ready to retire yet. And I think over the years, particularly a few years ago, a little bit less so today, people have been confused that they may have to make this decision where if they want to use AWS, they have to put everything in AWS, or they can't use AWS at all. And of course, it's not a binary decision in being able to run your existing data centers alongside AWS. We know that what our customers want is they want to be able as seamlessly as possible to run their on-premise data centers that they're not ready to retire yet alongside with AWS. And it's why over the last number of years, we have built a plethora of services that allow you to run in this hybrid mode. And so you see services like VPC I was talking about earlier, or Direct Connect, which is a private connection between your data center and AWS, typically through a go-between like an Equinox. We've built a number of identity federated services. We have a lot of customers who say, look, I've invested a lot of energy into my management tool that I use, either VMware's vSphere or Microsoft System Center, and what I want to use is that same tool, but I want to also manage my AWS resources that way. So we've built plugins to make that easy for you to do. We've made it so that when you're using our compliance services like CloudTrail, which is the API log, or Config, you can use those and they're easily integrated with third-party tools like a Splunk or a Sumo Logic. Then we also had a number of our customers who said, look, we really like some of the deployment services that you've built. We love Code Deploy. We love OpsWorks, which is really a DevOps orchestration tool. And we want to use those, but we also want to use those on-premise so that we don't have two different deployment tools. And so we've made both of those services available for customers to be able to use on-premise as well. And then we have a storage appliance. It's really a virtual appliance so that if you have certain objects that tend to be hot and often used, you can store those objects on-premise while it asynchronously uploads all the rest of the objects to AWS and stores them in a format that makes it easy to spin up those resources and take action on them should you want to in AWS. So there are a very broad array of hybrid tools that will continue to build out as we know our customers are going through this transition over the next several years. And in fact, if you look at the significant hybrid implementations today, virtually all of them have been built on top of AWS. And this slide gives you a number of examples, and you've seen some examples in the presentations from our customers today as well. But I'll just point to a couple of them. If you look at Johnson & Johnson, they're running 120 applications on top of AWS with an intent to triple that this year in 2016. And they think of their collective environment of on-premises and AWS as the borderless data center. And they've built tools like their XBot, which is a compliance tool that runs checks every 10 minutes on that collective environment to make sure that they're enforcing the compliance that they intend to enforce. Or you can look at Comcast, which built their next generation digital entertainment platform, X1, on top of AWS as a hybrid application. And again, if you think about media, you have all kinds of peaks and valleys in demand for different content, and they're able to much more easily manage that using AWS alongside their on-premise data center. There's lots of hybrid applications running on top of the platform, lots of hybrid architectures, lots of capabilities to enable you to do that with more coming. The third question we get asked is, which regions are next? Where else are you going to have regions around the world? And let me first, give you our perspective of how to think about a region. A region for AWS is a physical place in the world where we have multiple data centers, which we often call availability zones. Now, that's a different perspective than most of the later coming technology infrastructure providers have. they like to launch regions with just one data center. And the problem with that is that if you're a company that cares at all about the availability of your application, you want multiple data centers so you have fault tolerance should there be any problem to any one data center. So we launch all of our regions with multiple availability zones or data centers. And you can see the orange numbers there are the number of availability zones in each of those regions. And we have regions on the east coast of the United States and on the west coast of the United States and in Europe and in Ireland and in Frankfurt, Germany, and in Singapore and Tokyo and Sydney, Australia, and Brazil and China. And then we've also announced that we have 4 more regions coming in 2016. And we've talked about a new region in India, a region in Ohio in the US, a region here in Korea, and a region in the UK. And I'm excited to tell you that available today, right now, is the Asia Pacific Seoul region. We've had thousands of Korean customers using AWS for many years now, but obviously in regions outside of Korea. And what they've told us is that they'd like to run more of their workloads, more of their applications on AWS, but they need us to have a region in Korea so they can have lower latency to their end users here, and for some companies where it's important to store their data in Korea for them to be able to do so. So we're very excited to announce and open the Seoul region today. We're very excited to see what you do on top of it. Now, if you look at the gaming industry in general, but particularly here in Korea, it's pretty amazing what's gone on in the last number of years. And Korea has some of the most successful and largest gaming companies in the world. And the #1 gaming company in Korea is Nexon. And Nexon has been using AWS for a while now. They're very excited about the Seoul region, and to share more about what they are doing on AWS and what they plan to do in the Seoul region, it's my pleasure to introduce the CTO of Nexon, Jung-Sung Won.
안녕하십니까. 저는 넥슨에서 신규 게임 개발을 총괄하고 있는 정상원입니다. 지금 보신 영상은 저희가 11월 18일 넥슨에서 퍼블리싱해서 국내 양대 마켓의 그 최단기간 1위를 차지하고 지금도 1등, 2등을 다투고 있는 히트라는 게임입니다. 히트는 요즘 대세인 AWS에서 서비스되고 있고요. 좀 떨리는군요. 예. 오늘 서울 리전의 런치로 인해서 현재는 도쿄 리전에 있는데 서울 리전으로 이전을 검토하고 있습니다. 넥슨에서는 AWS의 도움으로 그 서울 리전으로 옮기는 사전 테스트를 했으며 여러 가지에서 좋은 결과를 얻었고요. 앞으로 저희가 서비스하는 게임들도 다 같이 서울 리전으로 이전할 생각을 가지고 있습니다. 지금 화면에 보시는 게임들은 넥슨에서 서비스하고 있는 대표 모바일 게임들로서요. 모두 AWS에서 개발하고 운영하고 있습니다. 이 역시 서울 리전이 오픈된다면 옮길 계획을 가지고 있습니다. 간단하게 넥슨에 대해서 설명을 드리겠습니다. 넥슨은 보시다시피 매출에서는 그 국내 제1의 가장 큰 게임 회사이고요. 보시면 특징적인 것은 글로벌 쪽의 매출이 상당히 큰 부분이 있습니다. 저희는 처음에 시작을 할 때 온라인 게임에서 시작을 했었고 최근에 폭발하는 모바일 게임 시장에 진입이 살짝 늦기는 했지만 작년부터 신규 개발과 퍼블리싱을 열심히 함으로써 이제 거의 다 따라잡아서 가고 있습니다. 아직은 글로벌 게임 1등이라는 얘기를 듣기는 길이 좀 남았다고 생각을 하고요. 그래서 내부에서 30개 정도의 게임이 개발되고 있고 또 퍼블리싱 역량도 더 키워서 저희가 향후 글로벌 1등이 되기 위해서 노력을 하고 있습니다. 저희가 온라인 게임에서 처음 시작을 했기 때문에 모바일 게임 시장으로 들어오게 되면서 모바일 게임의 특징이 좀 독특한 게 있다고 판단을 했는데요. 첫 번째는 온라인 게임과 좀 다르게 모바일 게임은 6개월 정도의 그 라이프 타임을 갖고 있습니다. 그리고 제작 기간도 상대적으로 매우 짧습니다. 그러다 보니 짧은 기간에 제작을 해야 되고 그 라이프 타임 짧다 보니 빠른 결단과 빠른 실행력이 필요합니다. 또한 새로운 테크놀로지의 변화도 상당히 빠른 편에 속합니다. 그리고 또 하나 모바일 시장에 있어서는 온라인 게임과는 다르게 그 게임의 개수들이 굉장히 많이 나오고 있고요. 그 다음에 성공과 실패 폭이 상당히 큽니다. 그래서 이 게임이 성공할지 실패할지 예측을 하고 인프라를 선투자하기는 상당히 부담스럽습니다. 또한 잘 아시다시피 그 모바일 게임들은 마켓에 같이 올라가기 때문에 채널링 코스트가 상대적으로 온라인 게임보다 커서 저희가 비용 절감에 대한 압박이 좀 더 있었습니다. 이런 것들을 저희가 생각을 해보고 나서 저희가 찾아낸 솔루션은 역시 아마존 웹 서비스였습니다. 그리고 저희는 글로벌로 게임 서비스를 많이 진행하고 있는데요. 저희가 해외 IDC를 설치하는 것을 생각해 보니 여러 가지 아마존 웹 서비스를 썼을 때 장점이 있다고 판단했습니다. 첫째는 개발용 게임 서버를 할당에 소요되는 시간입니다. 그리고 또 하나는 글로벌 퍼블리싱을 할 때 새로운 서비스가 추가되거나 또는 유저가 늘어날 때 기계 하드웨어적인 설치를 하는 데 들어가는 시간이 상당히 차이가 많이 났습니다. 또 하나는 트래픽을 탄력적으로 대응하는 것인데 모바일 게임의 경우는 특히나 더 잘 되는 게임의 경우에 실제로 유저들이 처음에 들어오는 속도는 마치 디도스 공격을 당하는 수준으로 엄청난 속도로 들어오기 때문에 저희가 히트를 서비스할 때도 아마존의 그 아마존에서 트래픽을 받아줘서 아주 편안하게 서비스를 했습니다. 또 마지막으로 처음에 게임을 서비스하기 위해서 투자 비용이 없다는 점이랑 또한 그 온라인 게임의 경우 빠른 형태로 라이프 사이클이 정해지기 때문에 언제 게임이 줄어들지 모르는데 이것을 약정하지 않고 그 현재 게임의 상황에 따라 맞춰 진행할 수 있다는 점은 굉장히 큰 장점이었습니다. 또한 저희가 실질적으로 해외에다가 그 IDC를 설치하는 것보다는 전체 비용상으로도 30% 이상 절감 효과가 있다고 판단하고요. 그래서 특히나 모바일 환경에서는 그 전체적으로 게임 서비스의 이익률이 조금 낮기 때문에 선택이 아니라 필수가 되는 상황이라고 생각합니다. 또한 넥슨에서는 클라우드 네이티브 서비스를 사용하고 있는데요. 제가 아까 처음에 보여드렸던 그 영상에 있는 히트라는 게임은 AWS의 다이나모DB를 처음으로 저희 회사에서 사용해서 퍼블리싱한 게임입니다. 이것을 설정하게 된 이유는 처음에 그 게임이 워낙에 블록버스터라고 생각을 해서 유저들이 많이 들어올 때 어떻게 하면 안정적인 서비스를 할 것인가 고민을 했었는데 어찌되었든 SQL 쪽 DB를 사용할 때는 그 DB 사이즈가 늘어남에 따라 레이턴시가 증가할 것이라고 판단했고요. 그래서 저희가 MSSQL에서 NoSQL로 전환을 하면서 당시에 확장성이 뛰어나다고 이야기가 있던 다이나모 DB를 선택하게 되었습니다. 그래서 저희가 선택을 한 다이나모 DB를 써서 지금 보시는 바와 같이 데이터 사이즈가 꾸준히 증가함에도 불구하고 그 10ms 이하의 레이턴시를 유지할 수 있는 그런 형태의 데이터베이스를 서비스할 수 있었습니다. 그래서 저희가 아까 제가 말씀드린 것처럼 초반에 최단기간 1위를 할 만큼 유저들이 쏟아져 들어왔는데 이런 서비스를 통해서 안전하게 쾌적한 서비스를 유지할 수 있었습니다. 또한 저희가 글로벌로 최고 히트작이라고 불리고 있는 도미네이션즈라는 게임이 있는데요. 지금 글로벌로 1700만 다운로드가 일어났습니다. 이 경우에도 유저들의 행동 패턴들을 분석하기 위해서 아마존 레드시프트를 사용해서 분석을 하고 있습니다. 이렇게 넥슨의 모바일 게임 서비스에 AWS는 매우 중요한 역할을 하고 있고요. 이제 AWS 서울 리전이 생긴 만큼 넥슨은 향후 모바일 게임뿐만 아니라 국내 PC 게임에서도 AWS를 사용을 고려를 하고 있습니다. 또한 서울 리전 오픈을 통해서 넥슨은 AWS로부터 향상된 기술 지원을 기대하고 있습니다. 다시 한번 넥슨을 대표해서 AWS 서울 이전의 오픈을 축하드리며 AWS 서울 이전이 한국 게임 산업 발전뿐만 아니라 다양한 산업의 성장에 이바지할 수 있기를 기대합니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you. I love the DynamoDB story you told, and it's really become the de facto database of choice in the gaming industry. And so impressed with Nexon, what Nexon is doing globally in the gaming industry, and we're excited about helping you out here in Korea as well. So the last question that I'll talk about that we get asked a lot, which is a very understandable question, is really around if we're going to partner with a technology infrastructure platform, what's important to know about AWS and its culture if we're going to choose to partner with AWS? And I've been at Amazon now for almost 19 years. I obviously like a lot of things about the company. But I would tell you that I think there are 3 characteristics that I think are unique about our culture and that apply to AWS that I'll share. The first is that AWS is extraordinarily customer focused. Everything we do starts with the customer, and all of our strategies and tactics evolve backwards from there. And I think there are a lot of companies who talk about being a customer-centric company, but very few who actually live out those words. And I think if you look in the technology space, there are a number of companies who are competitor-focused. They look at kind of what competitors are doing and then try to battle them and adjust. There are some who are product-focused, who say, well, it's nice that you have opinions, my customers, about what you think the product should look like, but leave that to the experts. We'll take care of the product. And that also can be a successful strategy, but it's not ours. We are a customer-focused company. 90% of what we do every year comes from what you tell us matters to you. And the other 10% is from listening to what customers say are their issues, even if they can't articulate a feature or service, and trying to invent on their behalf. So the first thing that I think is unique about our culture is that we are extremely customer focused. The second thing is that we're pioneers and we're inventors. I think if you look at most large technology companies today, they have lost their DNA and their will to invent. And in fact, they acquire the vast majority of their innovation. And again, that's a strategy that could work, at least in the short term. It's just different from ours. We over-index in who we hire in hiring inventors and builders and people who look at any given industry and what the customer experience is in that industry and look to figure out a way to reinvent the customer experience. Those are the types of people that we hire. And I think in a dynamic space that's as big and as large a shift as the cloud is, it's very helpful to be partnered with the company who has the largest business, the largest number of customers, the largest ecosystem, the most services, a vision of it from the start so the services fit together as opposed to having to patch these together across lots of different acquisitions. It's very helpful to be partnered with the inventor and the pioneer in this space. And the third thing I would say that's unique about AWS and Amazon is that we are extremely long-term oriented. You won't find us calling you the last day of a quarter or the last day of a year with some kind of special deal to try to make our numbers in a quarter or a year. We're trying to build a business and we're trying to build relationships with all of you that outlast all of us in this room. And so I think something that ties this together well is a capability that we have in our support function called Trusted Advisor. And what Trusted Advisor is it's hundreds of automated checks where we look at how our customers are using our platform, and if we believe they're doing something that's suboptimized, we'll call or email you. And so, a simple example is if we notice you have certain ports open that you may not want open for security reasons, we'll say, hey, do you mean to have this port open? Well, one of the things we do is we look at the utilization of the resources our customers are using and paying for in AWS, And when we see customers have low or idle utilization, we'll reach out to them and say, hey, you sure you really want to be spending money with us when you're not utilizing the resources? You could always utilize them and pay for them later. And over the last couple of years, we've sent out a few million of these notifications to our customers that have added up to over $350 million of annualized savings. Now I ask you, how many technology companies email their customers and tell them to stop spending money with them to the tune of over $350 million a year? Not that many. And when we first started doing this, I think a lot of people thought it was a little weird or maybe a gimmick. But if you understand what's unique about our culture, it makes perfect sense. We don't want to make money from you if you're not getting value out of our services and platform. We hire builders and pioneers who are constantly looking to reinvent what the experience has been the last couple decades. And we're trying to build a business and relationships that outlast all of us here in this room. So I thank you very much for coming today. I hope you find that when you leave, you know more about the cloud and AWS than when you came. And I appreciate your time. Thank you.